Welcome to Three Voices Podcast. I'm Jamie Blue.
I'm DJ Airhead.
And here we come together to talk about our experiences that might be labeled as psychotic, including voices, mania, paranoia, and unusual beliefs. Some of us have been to hospitals and been given diagnosis. Some of us have not been given diagnosis. And here we are free to use any language we want to explain our experiences and extreme states. People sometimes describe their experiences as positive, spiritual, or supernatural. We're here to share, learn, and listen, so it's okay if you hear things you disagree with or agree with. It's okay if people like their meds, don't like their meds, like their doctor, don't like their doctor, hate their doctor. We respect the diversity of views. I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is DJ Airhead. I started hearing things at 3 and 4, started seeing things at 5. Had an extremely rough childhood with voices and visions that sent me in a lot of different directions.
I personally started having experiences when I was 4 years old. What started off as a very mild spiritual experience with nightmares. Each traumatic experience amplified that, so throughout the years became many different experiences until today I have kind of everything that's in the book under hallucination. So, the potpourri.
And I have had many other experiences as well. As a child, I was told by my voices not to trust people and only to trust the voices. And as a child, when I would do this in front of people, the bullies saw this and I got beat up quite often. I was beaten so badly and picked on so badly that second month, 5th grade, I quit school and never went back.
Yeah, I had a hard time trusting people as well. But that's why we're here now, is we're trying to make sure that people understand that this is a much more common experience than people want to believe, and give a safe space for people to educate themselves and find community.
I know for me, for many years, my voices ruled. I used to have voices that would wake me up and tell me, you're going to do A, B, C, or D, and if you do not do A, B, C, or D by noon, your mother would die. So I would do it. No matter how weird it was they told me to do, I went out and did whatever they said. A friend would try to stop me. I'm like, stop, you're killing my mom. He's like, I'm not even near your mom. What are you talking about? I'm like, just leave me alone. Mm-hmm. So my voices isolated me and had me acting and doing weird things, which sometimes came out as psychotic behavior towards family and friends.
Mm-hmm. All right, so in this, we will have things that we can read, and occasionally we hope to have some guests on. And today we are going to be reading out of Living with Voices. It's 50 Stories of Recovery, and it is written by a lot of people from the Voices community. Do you want to read down the list?
Professor Marius Ram, Sandra Escher, Jacqueline Dillon, Dirk Korsteins, Mervyn Morris, with stories of Eleanor Lungden, Rufus May, Ron Coleman.
And we'll probably refer to this book often. I'll also put a link of it in the description, and it'll probably be in several of our descriptions. So I'll go ahead and let you start.
What is recovery? To recover, voice hearers need to learn to cope with their social and emotional consequences of their original problems. In the recovery process, they will recognize the relationship between their voices and their emotions and what has happened to them. They also get a better view of the power relationship between themselves and their voices. The anxiety, powerlessness feelings, guilt, etc. are metaphors for the power relationship between the traumatic situation and the emotional neglect period. In the recovery process, they will take back power and will express their own power in relation to their voices and their problems. They also create choices and make it possible to take responsibility for their life and their emotions, and by doing so, heighten their self-esteem. Gradually, they discover that voices are expressing emotions, and these emotions are those the voice hearer has experienced as a result of a traumatic situation. The recovery process is one of turning points in the relationship with voices. With the person becoming more and more independent and powerful, this is what we see in the approach that leads to recovery. It doesn't make sense to attempt to cure signals of problems, and is not an approach that particularly is successful either, because the traumatic background is not recognized, and the emotions involved are not coped with. Voices are stories of threatening emotions of a person twisted by terrible experiences of hopelessness, feelings of guilt, aggression, and the anxiety. Stories in this book you will read again and again about the relationship between trauma and emotional neglect and other stressful problems and hearing voices because of its overwhelming emotions related to these traumas. Ron Coleman is a well-known voice hearer who has recovered from his distress related to his voices. He very clearly describes his personal recovery process and tells us about these 4 elements that are very important.
The first element, involving others, because you need to get distraction, hope, support, and friendship.
Because a lot of people don't know which way to go. Their voices have confused them for many, many years, so they don't know which direction to go. They don't trust people. And when you get support and friendship, it can change the foundation that you stand on. Next one, work on self. Self-esteem, self-confidence, self-awareness, above all, self-acceptance. I have worn many, many masks in my life, trying to be something that I wasn't. Those masks were so daunting that it just about killed me. I know that now I have to accept that I am a voice here. I'm going to see and hear things for the rest of my life. It's how I deal with them that matters.
Making choices. Become responsible for your own decisions and find a purpose in life.
When me and Jamie sit in groups and we do trauma and voices groups and we watch people come in and they are so victimized by their mental health that they don't know which way to turn, and we watch them go from being victimized to becoming victors and not their voices or visions run their life. And one of the things is, Mark Twain said, the 2 most important days of your life, the day you're born and the day you find out why. When we sit in those groups and we watch people not be victimized by mental health anymore, that's why we do this. That is my purpose in life, and I'm sure it's Jamie's purpose as well.
We also get the opportunity to watch people find their own purpose in life too.
Take ownership. Learn to own your voice hearing experience. It is personal and belongs to you. You need to become better friends with these voices.
Better friends with yourself.
First one. These are 9 elements that Ron talks about are very important as well. Meeting someone who takes an interest in the voice hearer as a person, because a lot of times with voices and visions, we are isolated, we're pushed aside, and many, many times I've seen people go out and we try to tell other people about our experiences and they don't listen because it scares them or terrifies them. Then instead of reaching out, we hide, we don't do what we should do, which is open up. We lose our voices. When we lose our voices and we have nobody, that's when things go bad. When someone takes an interest in you as a voice hearer, it can change everything.
Mm-hmm. Giving hope by showing a way out and normalizing the experience.
And sometimes voices and visions are like bullies in a schoolyard. They'll pick on you, they'll tease you, they'll push you around. The more they scare you and intimidate you, and the more they see your reaction, the more they'll do it. Mm-hmm. By normalizing the experience and not letting them scare you, you can change everything by opening up and letting it happen and not letting it mess with your whole day.
When you normalize the experience, you prevent isolation and you stop being afraid, and it's the fear that often amplifies the situation and makes things worse.
Next one, meeting people who accept the voices as real and being accepted as a voice here by others, but also by oneself. Mm-hmm. And that is one thing. A lot of times we try to tell people about our experiences and they're so far out there they don't believe that they are real. These things are real when they happen to me. I know they're real. I've seen them, I feel them, I smell them, I can feel their touch. And I also accept that I am a voice hearer.
Right. Becoming actively interested in the hearing voices experience.
There are books, there are videos, there are podcasts, and we're making one right now. And I think it's very important to understand and listen to different people's aspect and the way they look at their voices and visions and how they deal with their voices and visions. Because maybe out of 200 coping strategies you find online, maybe 2 will work for you and help you have a better life and give you something positive to go on. Recognizing the voices as personal and becoming the owner of one's voices. I let the voices know I'm driving the bus. Y'all can get in the back seat, run your mouths all you want, but I'm in control of this human. I drive me, not the voices. When I let the voices drive, I break out in a pair of handcuffs.
I also find that my voices, they're very in tune to me because, well, they've come from me and they've attached to me for whatever reasons that are unique to me. I have things that have come along from my life and my experiences that other people don't understand, and I can't expect them to. So I can't expect other people to find the solutions to things that I'm the one who's experienced them. So they're my voices because they're my experiences.
Next one would be changing the power structure between you and your voices. Let the voices know you're in control. You are the boss. Setting up boundaries. Letting them know there are times they can talk to you and there are times they can't talk to you. I was going to do my driver's test in 2015, and I told my voices, I looked at the back seat of the car and I said, all you guys have to be quiet. I'm going to do a driver's test, and if you make me mess up, I may not get my license. Therefore, I did the test. The voices were quiet, but I promised at 7 o'clock at night I would talk to them and listen to whatever they had to say, whether I liked it or not. And they did, by setting up good, healthy boundaries and letting them know how this power struggle is going to be between you and your voices. Turn it into a friendship.
Making choices.
Just because my voices tell me to go rob a bank doesn't mean I have to. I would love to have the extra money. Going to jail would suck. Just because my voices tell me effing kill yourself, you don't have to kill yourself. I let my voices know, and I even have tried this, and it works very well. I let the voices know thank you, and actually thank you for trying to support me in committing suicide, but I'm alright. I don't feel suicidal. I don't want to die. It's just you guys that think that I should. And we don't have to do what they want us to do at all times. We can think for ourselves. Changing the relationship with you and your voices, setting up those healthy boundaries. You want to treat them and talk to them like you would a 4 or 5-year-old kid, or how you would talk to one of your best friends. If you wouldn't talk to your best friend that way, then don't talk to your voices that way. Give them respect, and they will give you some respect in return. Last one, recognizing one's emotions and accepting them. I am a huge proponent in that wellness is a key concept of managing any kinds of voices and visions. When you have balance, you're more balanced out. When you're off balance and you're not doing yoga, tai chi, or qigong, or exercise, your voices can come in and manipulate you and use you easier. So wellness is a key component, involving others, going to groups. The day I went to my first voices group, it changed my life. I went in there and I remember going in and telling them, my name's this, and I know and who what I am. I thought that I was a serial killer. My voices have always tried to get me to hurt people. Luckily, I never have, but they've always tried to push me in that direction. And when I was in that group and I was able to open up, and nobody looked at me funny and said, you hear what? Or you see what? I had people saying, I felt that way too. That's happened to me. I found commonality. I found something that felt natural, organic, and the organic feel of a peer support and the Voices and Visions support group has changed my life profoundly.
How did you get involved in your first Hearing Voices Network group?
I had gone to my voc rehab counselor and my peer support specialist in a meeting and said, I hear all these voices and I see all these visions. I don't know how to deal with this. They took me to Hope, and I went to my first Voices and Visions groups in June of 2012.
How long was it before you started seeing a change in the relationship that you had with your voices?
About a year. When I first went to Voices and Visions group, my voices got really loud and really out of control. Every time it was about the right time to go to the Voices groups, they would flip out. I now understand that the Voices and Visions got worse because they were threatened by this group, and they were threatened at me having a better understanding and a better way of dealing with them. So it threatened them in many ways.
In addition to the groups and the peer support, were there any other tools that helped you the most?
Yes, in November of 2012, I had received a book called Living with Voices, 50 Stories of Recovery, and that gave such a perfect description of managing my voices in a very, very healthy manner, and actually helped me build better relationships with some of the voices I have. And there are some of my voices that I consider close friends, and I'll be honest, to this day, if my voices stopped talking, I would probably lose my mind.
Alright, so why don't you tell us a little bit more about your history?
So my story starts off when I was about 4. The first time I heard a voice. His name was Earl. I always was told by the voices that I could trust them, but I couldn't trust people. And then as a child, one day on my way into the bathroom, I looked up to the door that goes out to the backyard. I saw an Indian with a tomahawk. He was like a ghost. Then, when I was about 5, I was sleeping in my bed, and I heard something moving towards me, and looked up and saw this grotesque zombie walking like creature with his head ripped off all but of about an inch of his skin. His head would fall off to the left, and he would pull it up and keep coming towards me. His mouth was moving, but I could never hear what he was saying. One time, after seeing this guy for about a year, I jumped under the covers and hid, and when I jumped under the covers, I heard him say, "My name's Jim." This voice has always been an advisor, like a spiritual guide. He's always been there for me. At one point in time, I had the brilliant idea of going down to Circle K and stealing some Three Musketeer candy bars. Jim came to me that night and says, I know you're thinking about stealing those candy bars. That is not a good idea. Ask your mom for the money. So I knew that I should ask mom for the money and go buy the candy bars. But with Earl, he was there for me. He gave me a lot of reasons to mistrust the real world. Earl seems like about a 78-year-old man, kind of grumpy sometimes. And one time as a child, my mom was in her bedroom sleeping. I was in the living room. A buddy of mine showed up and says, let's go to this party. I said, yes, let's go. I started getting ready to go. About that time, my mom pops out of the hallway and says, you're not going to the party. I'm like, what? I got really mad, started throwing my shoes off, got pissed, and was upset.
Got upset.
Yep. And then the next thing you know, I woke up in the morning hearing a scratching on the door. When I heard the scratching, I opened the door, and there was my buddy that was trying to get me to go to the party, beaten within an inch of his life. My mom was one that always knew that I was a little different. She died in '99, before I had come to grips with my mental health. My mom knew I was different. As a child, I was very strange and unusual, and sometimes would seek escape in little fantasy worlds or visions. My mom was a voice here as well. I thought to myself for a long time I couldn't understand how my mom knew that was going to happen. I think it's because her voices had warned her. So I started school, had a very hard time. I had a very hard time with teachers, with kids. I was always picked on, bullied. I talked to people that weren't there. And that went in a very, very bad way for me, so I withdrew and unfortunately started smoking cigarettes about 7, smoking marijuana about 9, 10, going on 11. I did crank for the first time. I found out that when I was high and on drugs, I was normal, and I could pretend to be something that I wasn't. The problem was, this pretending took me into what I call wearing my masks time of my life. I was putting on masks and pretending to be something that I was not. And that led into all kinds of drugs and alcohol and using. So one time I was at this party, and every time my right ear would point toward this individual, I'd hear this loud whistle. I got a weird vibe off the guy when he would look at me. I didn't know what was going on. Later that night at the end of the party, I tried to sneak outside to go around and go around through the backyard. As going around through the backyard, I clicked the gate open. There that guy was. He beat me up. And my voices were trying to warn me. That's why they were telling me and giving me a whistle every time my right ear pointed towards the individual. As a little boy, dealing with drugs and alcohol, dealing with all these strange situations, there were some times that I felt like I was sliding in between dimensions, and I would even tell people, oh my God, did you see that? I was in another dimension. And they would look at me like I was crazy. I ended up getting the nickname Psycho, and it fit me very well, and I came to embody that. I remember one time I was at a party with some of my friends, but I was over in the corner talking to somebody who wasn't there. They were out hanging around with everybody. Everybody kind of pushed me aside and thought I was weirdo, and they called me Psycho. And I kind of was a little strange and unusual. I was a druggie, and that was also the time that one of my scariest voices came to life. I was running with a druggie crowd. My nickname was Psycho, and Psycho took on an existence all of his own. I believe this guy was kind of like a protector, definitely a fighter. He quite often wanted me to kill people and tried to convince me to kill and be a serial killer. I know now that this is not true, and at the time he was just trying to push me into being something that would have done damage to my mental health. And when he would get mad and say, kill people, I knew that I did not have to kill people, but I had been pushed to trying to commit suicide or kill other people by this voice. So I mentioned wearing a mask because I became really good at wearing all these masks, trying to hide what I was is a voice hearer and a vision seer. I was always afraid of what could happen if somebody noticed I was different. I was talking and seeing things that other people weren't. So growing up and hanging out with the crowd that I grew up with, Psycho fit in very well. Unfortunately, he had many outbursts, and my family and friends were very afraid of me, and still some are to this day because of my violent outbursts. My voices had always boasted about how much power they had. When they were my voices, they would tell me to do things. My mom, very sick individual, she had asthma, emphysema, and end-stage COPD. So my voices would tell me to do A, B, C, or D. If you do not do A, B, C, or D, your mom will die. So I would go out there and do whatever it was I was told, no matter how weird, no matter how strange. And I had a friend that came up and tried to stop me from what I was doing. I said, "You're killing my mom." He says, "I'm not even near your mom. What are you talking about?" So I continued doing what I did, what I was told to do by these voices. And I knew at this point in time, I was not driving the bus anymore. The voices were. I remember being times of being afraid to be alone with the voices, afraid because my voices and visions had pushed me into many blackouts. Anger would go from 1 to 250 in a matter of seconds. It was also about that time I started to become extremely interested in serial killers and serial killer movies. Remember seeing the movie Psycho? It made me feel so not alone, and it made me feel that somebody else out there would understand what I was going through. And I went to a lecture once. I saw this lecture on the Salem Public Library that said, "Anne Rule." So I went to that lecture and learned about Ted Bundy and about her experience with Ted Bundy. David Berkowitz, son of Sam serial killer, he had heard voices and got orders from the Rottweiler next door. Maybe if he could have gone to some of the voices and visions groups, maybe he might not have killed people. Anyway, about 12 and 13, I had a lot of people coming to the house partying with me and became kind of popular drug addict. And my mom kind of let us have anybody over there at any time. But there were times I had visions of people coming in, beating us and killing us and hurting us, and then I would zap back into reality. And it wasn't happening, it just was a vision. I never knew when or where a vision would happen or how a voice would come out. They would tell me some scary thing would happen, and there were a few times that they would warn me about something and it would come true. Most of the time I have lived in fear that the world would find out that I hear voices and visions, and fear that something was going to happen and something was going to come along and kill me. And this were the times where things got really weird. Feeling tactile sensations on my arms, on my legs. I could sense something was out there in the dark, but I couldn't see it. I could feel it. The hair on my arms would stand up. It was like fingers running down my back and down my spine. It left me in fear, and my paranoia got the worst of me, and my voices would mess with me and tell me, "You're going to get sick." I would start trembling in fear and terror, and because of this fear and this terror, I would end up getting sick. So I believed that my voices could force me to do things, just strengthened by this. So terrified by all this, it would push me into a deeper drugs and alcohol. I started experiencing with acid, shrooms, meth. I used to escape something that would take me away from the scary voices and visions. Which, as a person at 13 years old, extremely confusing, and hearing voices really left me feeling out of touch with people, like I couldn't relate to people. Normal people looked at me weird. I always felt like they're all going, "Wow, this guy is really weird." So, sometimes it was easy to slip into a fantasy world where people understood me. Like I'm going on 13 and 14 and was diving deeper and deeper into drugs. I was high and pretended to be normal, wearing those masks I talk about. Around 15, I met up with a woman and started a relationship. We dated from 1986 to 2001. Then one day I went up to Thriftway to use the telephone. This man came up, was using the phone, trying to get in contact with somebody that worked with him. I heard him hang up the phone. He was upset the guy wasn't going to work for him. I asked what kind of work. He said he cleaned the PG&E building on Portland Road in Woodburn. I worked for 3 nights with this gentleman. The 3rd night he hit me over the head, tied me up to a table, and hurt me in ways that are unspeakable to this day. Then when he went to drop me off, he pulled up to my house and put a gun out from underneath his seat and told me, "If you ever tell anybody about what happened here, I'll kill your 2 stepsons and then your girlfriend and then you." This made my mistrust in the world so much more stronger than it ever been. How my voices told me I couldn't trust this world seems all too familiar. I felt more paranoid. I hid in the bedroom for quite some time. My voices and visions would start to scream, yell, cuss, scare me and terrify me. Still, trying to be a good parent and be there for my 2 stepsons, I did the best I could. In 2001, my voices and visions had gone off the deep end. Where I was working, a guy was sexually harassing me. He grabbed my balls and squished them as hard as he could. I blacked out. I went home in this blacked out state, and unfortunately I tried to hurt my family that night. Family of 15 years. Girlfriend, 2 stepsons, and my 2 grandchildren. The next day I called my sister because I noticed that my son's stuff was gone. And my boys didn't go anywhere without their Sony PlayStation or Sega Genesis. Anyway, after my sister had told me what I had done, I couldn't believe it. My brother-in-law, I guess, came over and tried to stop me in my blackout because I had blacked out completely. He tried to stop me and said, "Get a hold of yourself." I looked at him and said, "This individual is not here." He said it scared him, and my brother-in-law left. I knew at that point I was definitely not driving the bus. The next day when my sister told me what I'd done and what I'd said, I decided to commit suicide. I wrapped my belt around stage lighting that was up to the ceiling, put a belt around my neck, poured gasoline all over myself, and I knew at that point if I'd tried to hurt a family that I'd been with for 15 years, I needed to die. My life had to end so no one else could get hurt. I had a nugget of weed put in a bong, and I was getting ready to light that up and then kick the stool out from underneath me as I was ignited with flames. About that time, the cops came in and kicked the door open and said, "Freeze, put the bong down." I threw the bong aside. They got me down off of where I was at. They were trying to get the buckle out, but some of my skin had got caught in the buckle. I blacked out all over again. As they're taking me out the front door, the cop said, I looked up and he says, "Do you have anything to say to your sister and brother-in-law?" I said, "I don't even know who the F those people are." I ended up at the psychiatric medical center for a while. I got out and then, of course, went right back to using drugs and alcohol, the one thing I'd known for so long. I had some other traumas that happened in 2002, 2005, and then one in 2010. My voices and visions had gotten worse than ever. Things were completely and entirely out of control. That's where I died twice in the ambulance and went to the hospital because I tried to quit all the drugs I was on, which was an exorbitant amount of drugs. An insane amount. I now have a pacemaker and defibrillator. My life is much different than it's ever been before. And that's where I went in and met Project Able, did the peer support specialist training, and then was introduced to the Recovery Outreach Community Center. I now do groups at both Rock and Able with some of my good friends, and it's changed everything. I saw my voices and visions, this rape that happened to me, as something that stopped me from being what I was. Now I understand that even if I could go back in time, I wouldn't want to, and change all those bad things that happened, because each one of those profound things that happened made the person that I am today, took me from a self-centered, egotistical piece of shit to the person that I am now. And I am very glad to have gone through everything that I have, because it made me who I am and gave me the passion for this Voices and Visions movement that I have today. And if I spend the rest of my time volunteering and being there for individuals that have gone through rough times, I hope I do spend the rest of my life doing that. It is my purpose, and I've found my calling. My calling is to be there for the mental health people. Help people understand their voices and visions. So, Earl, he came to me, he was screaming and yelling. I now understand that he was trying to help me express emotions that I couldn't express. He's angry that those people took advantage of me. He's angry that those people hurt me. He's angry that someone took advantage of me, and he's expressing emotions that I do not know how to express myself. So I now understand that Earl is not angry at me, he's angry for me. Anyway, so I will bring my story to a close. I still have a lot more of my story, but I'm going to try not to squeeze all this in on the first time. Just definitely wanted you guys to understand who I am, where I come from, and what I've been through.
Thank you. And thank you for trusting us with that.
Thank you. You guys have a wonderful evening.
And we'll be here again. Thank you.